Welcome to Mintel's Little Conversation, real conversations with actionable insights into what consumers want and why. I'm your host, Andrew Davidson, based in New York. Today's episode is a special one because it's all about insight, and it's also something of a milestone. My guest today, David Faulkner, Senior Director at Mintel, is retiring after a remarkable career spent not just delivering insight, but leading insight teams and championing the craft of insight across some of the world's leading food and beverage companies, including Kerry, Dairy Crest, and Pepsi. For the past 7 years, I've had the privilege of co-facilitating Mintel's Insight Workshop with David, a program that began with some external inspiration, but quickly evolved into something uniquely ours. Over time, we've refined it to reflect how insight drives business impact and shapes strategy. And more recently, how AI is pushing us to elevate the way we think about insight itself. So, as David wraps up his Mintel journey, we thought this would be the perfect moment to reflect on what we've learned about insight, what it means, how to develop it, and why it matters. David, welcome to the pod. Where are you joining from today?
Thank you very much. I'm joining from Newbury, which is about 50 miles west of London. And the weather is looking a bit grim today.
Excellent. Well, welcome. So when we started teaching insight, some years ago, the word insight was used everywhere, but it was rarely defined. I mean, now with hindsight, how would you explain what real insight is and why it matters?
The word insight, it gets thrown around so often. I think it's almost lost its meaning. You'll hear people call something an insight just because it's an interesting fact or a surprising stat, but that's not enough. Real insight goes deeper. It gets to the why behind the what. It reveals something that wasn't previously understood or fully articulated. A true insight shifts how you see a situation. It might challenge your assumptions. It might uncover a hidden motivation or expose a lever for change that hadn't been spotted. It's not just information, it's information that makes a difference. And that difference might show up in how you frame a strategy, or you shape a product, or communicate a message, or solve a business problem. Because of my background in dairy, as you know, we decided to use the yogurt market as a category we wanted to explore and take examples from. So, excuse me, Andrew, I'll use the yogurt market once more. Let's say you got a data point that shows that single-serve yogurt sales spike between, say, 7 and 9 in the morning on weekdays. That's interesting in itself, but it's just information. It tells you what's happening, but that's about it. And some people just stop there and call it an insight, but the real value comes when you dig into why this is happening. And what we found is that people aren't just grabbing yogurt for convenience. It's more emotional than that. It acts as a kind of controlled indulgence, a way to feel like you're doing something good for yourself in the middle of a chaotic, maybe less than perfect morning. And that's a completely different lens. Now you're not just selling breakfast, you're selling calm and control and self-respect. And that insight doesn't just explain behavior, it unlocks new ways to respond to it, whether it's in your messaging, your packaging, or even your innovation pipeline. And that's the difference between reporting facts and revealing messages. Insights adds emotional depth and opens new possibilities. And yes, insights can feel rare sometimes because we often expect them to be totally original, but they don't need to be absolutely new to the world. They need to be something new and useful to the people who are making the decisions. And that's the sweet spot.
I mean, that's such a great example. I mean, I think you've always been keen to stress the emotional component of insight. That yogurt example really proves it there. I mean, I think you've said it all, really. I think one thing I'd add is that what strikes me about insight is that it gives brands a competitive advantage. Everyone's viewing the same competitive landscape, but those brands that can identify the insight before the competition are the brands that are going to win. And that's really, what we're talking about here, having an impact. And I think the other point I'd make is that, with so much data available, just more data than ever, insights professionals are more relevant than ever. And so this topic is just more important than ever. I mean, you referred to it there. And one thing that we've always stressed in the training is the insight should deliver original thinking. And that can be a big pressure for analysts or those looking for insight. I mean, it's damn hard to come up with something totally original every time. Now, how do you create insight in a way that still feels powerful but isn't paralyzing?
Yeah, I think it's really important to be honest about that. Insight should be rare. If we called everything an insight, then the word loses its meaning. So it's not surprising sometimes that analysts can feel stuck or under pressure to come up with something original every single time. But I think we try and shift that expectation a bit. An insight doesn't have to be original to the world, as I say. It just has to create a shift in perspective for people you're speaking to. And that's the key. If it helps your team or your client see something different that they haven't seen clearly before, or reframes a problem in a way that opens up action, then that's an insight. Sometimes it's not about discovering a brand new truth. It's about revealing something that was probably always there, but hadn't been articulated. It might even be something that people sort of knew, but you put it into a sharper language, or can connect the dots in a way that makes it suddenly useful. I think that's why we always say insight's not just observational or information. It's about the connection and the interpretation that gives it meaning. And when analysts understand that their job is not to be original just for the sake of it, but to be meaningful and useful, I think it takes a lot of pressure off and actually leads to better thinking. The magic often comes from looking at familiar data through a fresh lens. And it's more about genius, less about genius, I think, but it's more about discipline and curiosity.
I like that. I mean, I know we talk about curiosity in our training, and there's a quote that I read from the former CMO of Nike, Greg Hoffman, and he said, and I'm going to read it: "Leaving inspiration to chance, where it just hits you in a random moment, is not a recipe for sustained success in a creative world. You have to go out and find it. While some may be born with a seeker's mentality, others can learn to be more curious. Curiosity is a muscle that needs training." So I think, yes, you have to get into that mindset, right? I mean, whether you're reading, listening to a podcast, whether you're shopping, whether you're talking to each other, it's all about having the right questions to ask and getting to the so what, and really looking for the meaning, as you say.
Yep, yeah, I totally agree.
So when did you first realize this approach to insight could shift how people work?
I think I remember it quite clearly. It was quite early in the program. We just started delivering the workshops, and we were testing out different ways of explaining the concept of insight. And what stood out was the feedback. People weren't just saying, "I get it," but they were saying, "I enjoyed this, and I understand it, and it really means something to me." And that really struck me, because insight can be a quite heavy or abstract topic, but the fact that people were enjoying learning about it meant that it was actually landing in a deeper way. But the real breakthrough came when we structured it all to what we now call the journey to insight. Up until that point, people often said that insight felt vague, like something you might magically stumble upon, or you didn't. By breaking it down into steps, setting clear objectives, gathering data from wide sources, sorting and clustering it, interpreting it, and then reaching the insight, we gave people a map to work with. And that map helped people to trust the process. They could see where they were and where they were going and how to get unstuck if they were stuck. Suddenly, insight didn't feel like something kind of for a lucky few. It felt accessible. And that was the moment I think I realized it wasn't just training. It was a way to potentially reshape how people work and think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that framing it as a journey was so important, because I think also just the fact that framing it as a journey acknowledges that insight isn't a sort of strictly linear process. There's some flexibility there. Plus, we always address this idea of instinct versus process. I mean, this idea that sometimes insight just hits you, and then other times it's the result of planned analysis. But even when it is this aha moment, there's this process going on in your mind. So I think the journey was, like you say, the journey was the key. I think for me, I mean, when I could tell it was resonating was during the case study exercises initially in London when we first kicked this off, and seeing the collaboration, seeing the excitement, and then the teams coming up with some really original insight. And then as we expanded it globally, seeing how it resonated across different countries. You traveled to Shanghai, I went to Sao Paulo, and we could see how it was being appreciated universally.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, it is. The creation of insight is quite emotional. It's about personally emotional. You feel good in yourself when you get to somewhere. So it's quite visceral in a way. So and it's getting to that situation rather than just doing stuff by rote. And that's where the challenges are.
Yes, exactly. I mean, why do you think people connected so strongly then with the insight journey? Where do they most often get stuck along the way?
I think, as I say, it's connected because it finally gave people a structure to work with, to something that wasn't, to something that, say, probably felt in the past a bit mysterious and perhaps a bit fuzzy. And it's something, you either got it or you didn't. So when we introduced the insight journey as a clear step-by-step path, it helped people realize that insight isn't a rare talent or just about a eureka moment. It's skill that can be developed. I think each stage, setting objectives, gathering data, as you say, sorting and clustering and interpreting and getting to that insight, it all kind of has its own rhythm. Yeah. People could see where they were getting stuck and where they were going, where they were feeling stronger and better about it. And it made the whole thing feel a lot less overwhelming, I think. But if you ever had to pinpoint about where people got stuck more often, it's probably in the middle between sorting the data and interpreting it. That's the moment where you have to stop organizing data and information, start making meaning out of it. For many, that's a scary bit because it feels subjective. You have to take a position, and you must take a position. You make a call and risk being wrong, I guess. And that's where we started to encourage people to trust their own judgment.
Right.
I mean, the goal isn't to be reckless, and it's about being thoughtful and brave with the information that you've got. And once they realise that it's where the interpreting of the data is where the unique personal value comes in. I think it's not just about the data themselves. Then they start to grow in confidence, and that's when the real insights start to emerge.
Yeah. When I look back, I think people often get stuck at that surface level. They struggle to move beyond the obvious and really stretch their thinking in new directions. I think at some point as we had sort of developed the workshop, we decided to include a creative thinking video called Laszlo the Amazing Fortune-Telling Goldfish, which basically explores more than 100 unexpected ways that you could use a goldfish beyond just keeping it as a pet. And the idea was really just to make a point that the first idea isn't always the best one. And that creativity happens when you push past the obvious. It wasn't that you had to have more than 100 insights, but it's this idea, that it's not the first thing that comes to mind. And in fact, I brought a prop along with me, David, because I think one example that you often use was this. Perhaps you could explain the background, because that was insight to me when you told me about WD-40.
Yeah, I mean, WD-40 famously is named that because the person who was trying to invent the problem of a sort of water dispersant, I think that was allegedly his 40th iteration, his first 40th attempt at it. And so he just called it WD-40.
And I didn't know that. I'm sure everybody's got some WD-40 in their house somewhere, even if they don't know it. So, I mean, you've seen a lot of light bulb moments in the workshop. Is there one that still makes you smile?
I think the one that really stands out is when we introduced the pet care case study. We knew we needed something that participants could engage in emotionally, not just intellectually. And so we picked pet care because honestly, people love talking about their pets. They're interested in their pets, and it sparked a lot of conversation and imagination. And I guess it worked better than we imagined. The data was rich, of course, but it was the personal connections that brought the whole thing to life. Participants started to analyze behaviors and trends. They couldn't help but share their own stories as well, about their dogs and their cats and even their guinea pigs or goldfish. And it completely changed the dynamics in the room. And that emotional resonance, that made everything, the learning more memorable, I think. People weren't just going through the motions of sorting data, they were relating to it. Because of that, the insights that they uncovered felt more human,
yes,
more grounded in real experience. And I guess it reminded us that insight is ultimately about people. It's not just about patterns, it's about where people can connect personally with a problem they're exploring. And that elevates the whole process. The case study taught us about the power of choosing content that feels relevant and alive to make the thing work and make people understand and want to work with it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we saw so many creative ideas for the pet care industry. It was amazing. I mean, pet dating services was a good one. A theme park for pets was another. I mean, they were having fun with it. And that was the idea. It was to stretch the thinking, to stretch the creativity. Which kind of leads to my next question, actually. I mean, one of the key things that we tried to instill in the workshop was this idea that analysts should be bold in their thinking, and introduced this idea of bold, not just relying on the obvious or safe ideas. Why do you think being bold is so hard for people, and how can they unlock it?
Bold thinking, I guess, can be scary. I think it's because we've all been conditioned, especially in professional settings, to avoid risk, to be careful with language, to soften opinions. We're definitely told to be backing everything up with data and to hedge our statements and keep the peace sometimes. And while there's value in being thoughtful, that mindset can also suppress the kind of clarity and conviction that makes bold thinking possible. We often reference, as you know, Scott Galloway, because he's a great example of what happens when you own your own perspective. He's not afraid to take a stand. And that decisiveness is what cuts through in all the noise. It's not about being provocative for the sake of it. It's about being unapologetically clear, I guess. And what helps people unlock that boldness is, firstly, to have a structured way of getting there. Because when your thinking is grounded in clear process, like the insight journey, you know that you're not just making things up. You've done the work, and that builds the confidence. And secondly, they need to feel safe. Boldness thrives in environments where people aren't afraid to be wrong, where it's okay to challenge assumptions. That's something we try and really hard to create, I think, in the workshops that we do. And spaces where it's safe to think out loud, to try things and be challenged constructively. And ultimately, boldness isn't about shouting louder. It's about daring to say something that matters.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I agree. Scott Galloway has endured. He's such a great example here. I think he has no idea how much he's shaped how we think about insight at Mintel. Because, we use a Scott Galloway video from 2021 where he predicted that Airbnb would get into commercial real estate. We then sort of debate and analyze that video about all the sort of aspects of what is bold, ranging from having an opinion, being confident, backing up an opinion with facts, the use of storytelling, the use of visuals, and the use of imagery and language. So there were just so many rich examples of boldness in Scott Galloway's delivery that's really ended up being a great example for us to use in terms of pushing our insights further. So how has your thinking evolved on the role of AI in insights and creativity?
Yeah, I think when AI first started gaining attention, a lot of people were understandably anxious, and they still are, worried that it's going to be replacing human jobs, especially in areas like analysis and creativity. But right from the start, we tried to frame, as you know, AI differently, not as a threat, but as a partner. And I think over time, that belief has only deepened. You'd say, you agree? It's what we see now is that AI is incredibly powerful at accelerating certain stages in the insight process, and it's brilliant at scanning massive databases and spotting patterns and organizing inputs quickly. And that's a huge boost to the first half of the journey when you're collecting all the data. But where it falls short and where humans can still lead is in making that emotional and contextual leap with all the information. That AI can give you a pattern, but it can't truly understand nuances behind it. It doesn't have the empathy and it doesn't understand risk in the same way. It doesn't, most importantly, it doesn't have gut instinct or a sense of timing or courage, which I think is important, definitely important when you're looking at insight. So in a strange way, AI has clarified what makes human thinking essential. It's pushed us to focus on that part of the work that requires imagination and perspective and judgment, and it's raised the bar, not lowered it.
So we've certainly evolved together on this, and it's been a fascinating journey. I think there's probably not enough discussion around the importance of the human role with AI, and we've focused on that. I think it's the fusion, of course, of AI and human that's key, because it can really stretch your thinking. Obviously, it can save you time, and that there's a lot of focus on time saving. But I think the real magic is when it can also push you to elevate your thinking, to be more bold with your insight. So what advice would you give someone who wants to use AI thoughtfully without losing curiosity or originality?
I think the most important thing is to treat AI as a co-pilot rather than a driver. It's there to extend your thinking, not to replace it, definitely. And that means staying in control of the questions that you're asking and the assumptions you're testing and the decisions you're making as well. You can use AI to do the heavy lifting, so scanning and summarizing and clustering data. But hand over the keys when it comes to interpretation. It's about staying curious and asking, is this surprising? Does it align with what I already know, and what's missing there as well? Also, use AI as a way to stretch your perspective. Sometimes it'll surface something that you hadn't thought of, and that's great. But take it further, challenge it, push it, and that's where originality, I guess, lives. It's not in the output, but how you engage in it. And lastly, again, most importantly, I think it's about protecting your own voice as an analyst. The more you understand your audience, your subject, and your intention, the more you use AI to amplify your creativity rather than just dilute it.
Yeah, brilliant advice. I would just add the golden rule. The more you provide intent, the better your output will be. Feed it your thoughts and ideas and build from there.
Yeah.
So after 7 years, what do you hope people carry forward, and what would you say to the next generation of insight storytellers?
Thanks. Interesting question. I hope that people walk away with more than just tools and templates. I hope they carry a mindset, one that's curious and courageous and definitely willing to look beyond the obvious. You need a mindset that knows that insight isn't something you just stumble across, but something you work towards. It takes effort, though. It's about asking better questions, and it takes a willingness to sit with uncertainty that gets in it for a bit more longer than possibly feels comfortable. So the next generation of insight storytellers, I'd say, your role is about not just reporting facts. It's about helping people to see differently. And that's a big responsibility. But it's also an incredible privilege. You've got the power to influence how decisions are made, how problems are solved, and how people are understood. So it's all about being bold, being thoughtful, staying curious. And it's not about being the smartest person in the room. It's about being the one who sees things in a slightly different way and invites others to do the same. And that's what storytelling with insight is all about, really. It's not just about explaining, it's about revealing. And when you do that well, you can create real, lasting insight.
I mean, that's a great message. And I usually wrap up with 3 takeaways, but I think today that's the perfect place to end. So David, thank you for such a thoughtful conversation. It's been an honor co-facilitating the Insight Workshop with you. On behalf of everyone at Mintel, thank you for everything you've done for our clients, our teams and the industry. You've had a lasting impact. You're truly a Mintel legend.
Thanks so much.
The conversation doesn't end here. Head over to Mintel's LinkedIn or Instagram. Let us know what you think, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. If you'd like to know more about Mintel, visit mintel.com and sign up to become a member of our free Mintel Spotlight community. And finally, make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Goodbye for now, and we'll catch you next time on The Little Conversation.